Former President Jacob Zuma could be headed back to prison. This is after yesterday the High Court sitting in Pretoria dismissed the decision to grant Zuma medical parole as unlawful. In setting aside that medical parole, Judge Matojane directed that the former president must serve the remainder of his 15-month prison sentence behind bars. It was back in July that the former president began his contempt of court sentence at the Estcourt Correctional Centre, only to be released in September for medical reasons. Afriforum, the DA and the Helen Suzman Foundation challenged that decision in court, and as you know now, they won. The Jacob Zuma Foundation also speaking out, saying that they'll appeal that ruling. So, will Zuma succeed in avoiding prison this Christmas? And what are some of the legal obstacles that he's likely to face? Let's try and unpack this all for you now. Bring in Ulrich Roux, who is a legal expert, joining us via our video link, and might I add, no stranger to the program. Ulrich, always great speaking to you, sir. Thanks very much indeed for making time. So, in my mind, there are two main issues that the judgment highlights. The one is around whether or not Arthur Fraser actually even had the authority to grant that medical parole. The other was around the criteria for which medical parole can be granted. One of them being that the said inmate must be terminally ill. Is that how you also see it?
Hi, good morning. Yes, thank you for having me. Yes, certainly. The judgment clearly sets out that the only statutory body who can make a determination on whether a person should be released on medical parole or not is the Medical Parole Advisory Board. Having said that, Section 79 of the Correctional Services Act does grant the power to the Commissioner of the Department of Correctional Services to also have an input in the release of an inmate on medical parole. But that is not an automatic or autocratic right. It is not a right that supersedes the recommendations of the Medical Parole Advisory Board. And that is what the court made clear, is that, yes, although Arthur Fraser can have some input on the release of a person on medical parole, that is not the only consideration. He needs to consider the recommendations made by the Medical Parole Advisory Board, which is a panel of experts and which makes an adjudication and finding on the facts before it, whether a person does qualify for medical parole or not. And quite frankly, in this instance, Mr. Arthur Fraser, who was the Commissioner of the Department of Correctional Services at the time, does not possess over those expertise to determine whether a person should be released or not. So in that instance, the court has once again empowered the Medical Parole Advisory Board as the only statutory body who can make that decision. But also, as you pointed out in the second part of your question, Jacob Zuma was found to be a person who has some underlying medical conditions, but that those conditions are not sufficient and are not severe enough to qualify him as a person to be released on medical parole. He is not a person who suffers from a terminally illness and who requires medical treatment around the clock, and he is not a person who cannot function on a daily basis under the control of the Department of Correctional Services, and accordingly, he's not a person who qualifies to be released on medical parole. So the judgment cleared up quite a few grey areas, and a good judgment in my view. It has taken into consideration all of the relevant facts, and it has certainly set a precedent going forward as to how a determination is to be made lawfully whether a person should be released on medical parole or not.
And that's important because there's actually been quite a deep debate, discussion, for lack of a better term, around what actually constitutes the circumstances under which anybody can be released from medical parole. The sense I'm getting from you now is that with the help of this judgment, there's a whole lot more clarity now than there ever was around who, in fact, can be released on the basis specifically of medical parole.
Yes, definitely. That it comes down to the fact whether it is a terminally ill condition that the inmate is suffering from, and whether if he is detained under the Department of Correctional Services, whether he would be able to function as a normal prison inmate as a result of his medical condition. And if he is not, then he would qualify as a person who is released on medical parole. And remember, being released on medical parole should never be seen as a get out of jail free card. And unfortunately, this has been the message that has been sent out previously. The immediate case that comes to mind is, of course, that of Shabir Sheikh, who many years ago qualified to be released on medical parole, and subsequent to that, people were taking photos of him enjoying a round of golf and being out in nature and in the environment and actually enjoying his freedom. And it can never be the case. A person who is released on medical parole is a person who is released because he can only receive the medical treatment that he requires if he is in the full-time care of medical staff or in a medical facility. So in other words, if he serves out the rest of his sentence under medical parole, it should either be at his home where he's treated and taken care of on a 24-hour basis, or in a medical facility such as a hospital.
Right.
And once again, in this instance, remember that we saw footage of Jacob Zuma recently attending to the Pietermaritzburg police station and laying criminal charges, and it certainly did not seem as if he was suffering from a terminally ill condition and whether he was receiving full-time medical treatment. So we need clarity on this aspect, because the message that is being sent out to society is that, oh, well, you can be convicted of a crime and you can be sentenced to a period of imprisonment, but all you need is to show that you're a little bit sick and then you'll be released. And that can never be the case.
Yeah.
There need to be strict guidelines. And once again, that is what the importance of yesterday's judgment is, confirming that the only statutory body who can decide whether a person is to be released on medical parole is the Medical Parole Advisory Board. And that is a board that is made up of experts, and they consider the evidence before them, and they can provide a court with an expert opinion as to whether a person should be released on medical parole or not.
Right. What was interesting, at least for me, was to see how much that judgment actually echoed the sentiment of the initial judgment that sent the former president to jail to begin with. I mean, this idea that no one is above the law, there aren't any exceptional cases, irrespective of what your social political history looks like in a country like ours. With that in mind, how do you reckon the appeal process will go in a context where, again, the judge now is really echoing what the judges before have said in the highest court in the land, that they can't even be seen to be giving the former president special treatment?
Yes, so remember, this is a very intricate situation, and there's numerous cases that have ebbed and flowed. But just to take the viewers back, that remember, Jacob Zuma has been found to be in contempt of a constitutional court order. That finding cannot be set aside, and that finding stands, and his sentence, which he has attempted to appeal and which he's attempted to take on review, is a period of imprisonment of 15 months. So as matters stand at the moment, he needs to serve that period of imprisonment of 15 months. He has only served 2 months of it. He accordingly needs to serve another 13 months, obviously subject to a parole application which could be launched by him and which must be adjudicated afresh and once again on the facts presented to the parole board. But he has now gone on appeal. He's indicated that he is going to take the decision on appeal, and the process that he needs to follow is he first needs to launch an application for leave to appeal to the High Court, and Judge Matojane will hear his application for leave to appeal. Crucially, he needs to prove that any other court, upon adjudicating the facts that were before the High Court in Pretoria, will make a different finding based on a balance of probabilities. And I truly think that he's going to struggle to be able to prove that. The court has clearly taken into account that he has been convicted of contempt of court. He needs to serve his sentence. The only way in which he can be released on medical parole is, as we have said now and unpacked that process, is if the only statutory body, the Medical Parole Advisory Board, confirms that he is a person who can be released. And I don't think that any higher court would make that adjudication. There's obviously a few steps that need to be followed now. If Judge Matojane in the Pretoria High Court refuses him leave to appeal, then he is free to petition the Supreme Court of Appeal. And if the Supreme Court of Appeal also dismisses his petition for appeal, then he will most likely approach the Constitutional Court. So Jacob Zuma will most certainly not be going back to jail soon.
Yeah.
But I think that it is inevitable that he will ultimately serve out the rest of his period of imprisonment, which will be 13 months.
Absolutely. Many people saying that this is just a matter of kicking the can down the road. But with that in mind, the other concern for many South Africans watching from the outside is that there is still a long legal process ahead, and time is lapsing as that happens. This judgment is very clear that whatever time the former president spent outside of jail shouldn't be considered when you count down his 15-month jail term. Do you think it's been clear enough, though, about what happens during the process of an appeal, for instance? Even if this lands up in the Constitutional Court, a process that might take us, dare I say, a couple more months?
Yes, so obviously, you know, that was one of the relief that was sought by the Helen Suzman Foundation, is that the period that he's been released and that he's not serving a period of imprisonment is disregarded in its entirety. So it doesn't matter how long this process takes. The entire appeal process is obviously going to be a lengthy one, but ultimately at the end of the day, if he's exhausted all of his appeal options, then he will still have to serve out the remainder of his sentence. So it might take some time, and obviously that is not a good message that is being sent out to society. But I think that it is inevitable that he will be serving that period of imprisonment. I don't think that any court is going to make a different ruling.
Ulrich Roux, always great speaking to you, sir. Thanks very much indeed for making time. Ulrich Roux, a legal expert, helping us break down the implications of former President Jacob Zuma's ruling yesterday in some respects, or at least an appeal against his medical parole. We'll keep watching that story as it continues to unfold.